You're listening to the Deltek Podcast, the show for leaders in project-driven industries where the stakes are always high and the margin for error is zero. In every episode, we bring you the data, the experts, and the insights that help you lead with speed, clarity, and control. Now, let's get into it.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Katja Obstgarten, and today I'm joined by someone who brings sharp insight into how technology is reshaping the world of project delivery. Bret Tushaus, Deltek's VP of Product Management. Bret is widely recognized for his fluency in digital transformation and AI, and his ability to cut through the hype to explain what these shifts actually mean for professional services firms. Today, we're talking about why project delivery feels like it is at an inflection point, and what firms really need to prioritize as we head into 2026. But before we dive in, Bret, could you please introduce yourself and share a bit about the perspective you bring to the industry?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Katja, for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. As Katja mentioned, I am a VP of Product Management here at Deltek. I've been with Deltek now going on 16 years. I have a little bit of a unique background, and prior to coming to Deltek, I was a Deltek customer for 15 years. So I'm actually trained as and educated as an architect, worked as an architect in the industry for a while before sort of shifting over to the technology and operations side of an architecture firm. So I've sort of sat on both sides of the table in regards to a practicing professional as well as someone sort of on the business management side. And then, of course, coming to Deltek for the past 16 years, I've been hyper-focused on, figuring out how technology can solve problems within architecture, engineering, and other consulting and professional services and project-based businesses. So I have the unique privilege of being in front of companies and customers on a regular basis and hear what's sort of their challenges they're facing and how technology is helping them and how the industry continues to evolve. And I would definitely agree we are at an inflection point. So it's an interesting time to sort of talk about, how the project-based industry is evolving, how technology, how solutions, and how businesses need to think about things a little bit differently as a result of that inflection point.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Bret, from your perspective, what's fundamentally changing about project delivery as we navigate 2026?
So I would probably say, the market is shifting in three primary ways. Expectations are changing. Predictability is now sort of a paid for feature. I think with interest rates sort of doing what they're doing, with supply chain challenges, with challenges around talent, delays are more impactful than they've ever been. And as a result, clients will pay a premium for that predictability. They'll buy guaranteed timelines, volatility to a certain extent as a result of these expectations shifting. I think is sort of the new villain, if you will. And then second to that is complexity. And complexity in so many ways. Our teams are changing. Think of the fact that we're now faced with managing humans and digital workers and AI agents sort of simultaneously. That's a new thing for all businesses these days. Not to mention the human teams are more distributed. They're more complex. There's more specialization across those teams. So that complexity is being added to projects and certainly creating a shift in the market as well. And then, the economics, you can't ignore that in today's climate, in today's world, certainly. Razor thin margins are sort of killing the concept that I think ruled project-based industries in the past, this concept of a heroic scramble where you could throw 10 extra people at a project in the last couple of weeks to make sure it got done. But the world we're living in today with as margins as sensitive as they are, those types of things just aren't possible, just aren't viable anymore. So the economics of project delivery and the project economy is changing. And as a result, businesses need to respond in different ways. It's kind of like, it used to be sort of the art of delivery. You had really good project managers who just knew how to deliver projects. And part of what's shifting in the market is delivery is becoming more of a instrumented system that businesses need to develop. And I think that's a new thing for a lot of organizations. And I think those organizations that get sort of that delivery as an instrument right will definitely bode much better in their business and their growth and their performance than those that maybe get that wrong and don't recognize that shift.
Those are all really good points. Just to expand on that a little bit, Why do firms still struggle with this predictability despite having so much of this project data at their fingertips?
So it's a great question. Data is the new oil to a certain extent, but here I think there's a little bit of a paradox there. These organizations are oftentimes data rich, but I would also classify them as sort of signal poor, if you will. And it's not like these firms that work in this industries are tech illiterate. They've got CRM systems, they've got ERP solutions, they've got PSA solutions, project management solutions. But I think to a certain extent, they're drowning a little bit in sort of this dashboard overload situation, if you will. Everyone has a dashboard, but not necessarily everyone has the truth. And, the Monday morning meeting becomes sort of an interesting conversation because, the business development person may say, hey, we've got $10 million in pipeline, whereas the project management or operations person might say, whoa, we're already 90% capacity. And then the financial person might say, we're at 90% capacity, but we're 20% down in billing. So how of all those things can be true simultaneously, I think is part of that data paradox. Because again, we have a lot of data, but we're signal poor to a certain extent. So the goal isn't 40 metrics nobody trusts. Instead, it's a focus on, or it should be a focus on, 8 to 10 key signals that leaders in the organization understand, agree on, and that everyone can act on. So I really think, the key answer to your question is, yes, organizations are data rich, but I think they're signal poor. And I think there's sort of a cultural shift in the industries that's needed to shift more to signals and how that can drive action within businesses versus just having so much data that it really doesn't become useful for anybody.
So, speaking of signals, which signals tend to be the ones that matter the most?
So there's a lot of signals, and certainly this is nuanced from one organization to the next, and even, to a certain extent, one project to the next. But I think if I were to maybe distill it down to 3 or 4, probably the first one I would say is decision latency and issue aging. A lot of times what actually slows projects down isn't necessarily the execution of the work. Sometimes that can be the case. Oftentimes, it's also things like waiting for approvals. It's waiting for feedback. If you expect and plan for a 2-day turnaround on a customer decision or something like that, and that consistently goes to 10 days, you're already in a bad situation in terms of being able to deliver that project on time. So I think a key signal is that decision latency, because if an issue is a week old, it's an issue, but if it becomes 10 weeks old, then it becomes a far more significant thing for the project, and being able to understand that early and being able to see that decision latency as a signal, I think is important. So I think that would be signal number 1. I think signal number 2 is unbilled or scope and commercial side of things. Oftentimes people look at unbilled time as a finance problem. And I think it needs to be seen a little bit differently than that, because oftentimes it signals disputes, it signals unapproved work. It signals a client refusing to sign off on something for some other reason that they're unhappy. If the money stops flowing, it means that maybe trust has stopped flowing as well. I think it's safe to assume often that commercial friction almost always precedes a schedule slip and things like that. So, understanding sort of the unbilled situation, in this case, money flow is oftentimes a proxy for project health. So I think that's a key signal as well. And then I'm sure this will come as no surprise in the project-based world, but resourcing, I think, is a key signal as well. But this isn't just about utilization and capacity. I also think a key signal, especially in today's world, sort of reflecting back on my comment about project complexity, is resource churn and context switching. And this isn't just about people leaving because they're tired out or they're going to a different organization or something like that. You swap the lead engineer or the lead architect or lead analysis on a very complex project often, and that destroys context. And when that swap happens, that lead engineer or lead architect, whatever the case may be, often spends a lot more time sort of catching up and reorienting themselves with that project than they do on actually getting work done. So, taking a sports analogy, if you will, you can't sub out your quarterback for a different quarterback every quarter and expect to win the game. That's just not a good plan. So I think context switching and churn around resourcing is a key signal as well. And then the last one I would probably highlight is maybe drift or estimate at completion, EAC drift. I think a great analogy here is, we all use GPS to get lots of places in our cars. And, when you first start a journey and you're 10 minutes away from getting someplace, and then something happens and now you're 10 minutes and, goes to 12 minutes, goes to 15 minutes, and you hear that recalculating. But that's sort of where estimated completion drift comes into play. And you need to keep an eye on that to make sure that things aren't creeping to a point where you're going to have a big problem at the end of the project. So having that early signal of EAC drift, not blowing the budget before it's too late, I think is a key signal as well. So again, if I had to pick the top four, I think it's those four that I would focus on: decision latency, unbilled time, resourcing, and EAC drift.
Awesome. Lots of good insight there. So if the issue isn't around the lack of data, but it's more about making sense of it in time, that brings us really kind of to thing of AI, right? AI is all about efficiency, productivity, how it can help, without adding to the noise. Can you give us some sense of where you see AI making a meaningful difference today and turning that project data into actionable insight?
Yeah, obviously you can't have a conversation about where any business, but definitely project-based businesses are going in 2026 without talking about AI. But I think there's a risk here, a little bit of a trap, maybe, if you will. I think there's an efficiency trap when it comes to AI these days. And let's face it, a lot of the talk around AI. In fact, I was just looking at a study, I think yesterday, and it was somewhere upwards of 86% of companies leveraging AI was still sort of in that digital assistant and efficiency mode of the use of AI. So it's easy to get caught in the efficiency trap around AI and really focus on AI as a way to, make something get done faster. But I think we need to start looking at, and businesses can benefit from starting to look at AI as a much different thing in 2026. The technology is definitely there. And this concept is more about decision velocity and how AI can be a bit of a force multiplier when it comes to that decision velocity. And maybe a way to look at it is status intelligence, if you will. AI has the capability of scanning project plans, scanning time entries, even looking at things that are, maybe a little bit less structured, like emails, transcripts, and things like that. AI can draft a very, very, very good report surfacing risks, surfacing things that have emerged in the past 7 days. And as a result, the PM doesn't spend time assembling things and reading out a spreadsheet in an hour-long meeting. Instead, they can have AI do all of that research and assembling for them, and then they can spend time acting on it, which obviously is a key thing. An example that I love to think about, because scope creep is always something that comes to mind when we talk about project-based businesses and delivering a project. And, just imagine the ability for an AI agent of some sort scanning incoming emails against a statement of work and flagging new requirements that weren't part of that original statement work or contract, and surfacing an alert in real time to a key stakeholder on that project that new requirement detected, not in contract, versus, someone agreeing to something and spending tens of thousands of dollars of unpaid work on that project. That's a key thing for people to keep in mind. So again, the decision velocity, I think, is a key thing when it comes to AI in 2026, and leveraging AI, not just for efficiency, like it's been so heavily applied in the months and years leading up to 26, but really looking at it for that decision piece. I would just add to this, because a lot of people, when you bring up AI in this context, well, can we trust it? Is it going to hallucinate? Things like that. The thing to keep in mind is human in the loop is non-negotiable, if you will. AI finds patterns, but humans make commitments. AI isn't going to manage a relationship. They're not going to apologize when something goes bad, and it doesn't handle ethics and things like that. So, knowing where AI fits in and where the human in the loop is important, I think is obviously something that needs to be considered there as well.
So that definitely leads me to believe that firms should consider using AI to support, but not replace the human judgment in project delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there's all kinds of talk about AI replacing staff, and I look at it more as AI is replacing tasks. AI isn't replacing their staff within these organizations. It's instead sort of giving their staff superpowers, if you will. It's about letting the PM focus on the client, not on the spreadsheet, putting it in very simple terms.
Understood. Speaking of workforce and staffing and resources, how are these leaner teams at firms, who have higher expectations changing what good delivery looks like from your perspective?
Yeah, good delivery. It's interesting. The way I think about this is, call it yellow early, and I'll explain what that means. We all know the sort of signal of red, green, amber when it comes to project status, right? Red is bad, green is good, yellow is, we're not really sure. And I think there's a tendency historically or traditionally in project delivery to, sort of hold back on changing the status of a project from green to red or green to yellow because it sort of signifies failure. And I think organizations and professionals are often a little bit leery of shifting to that green status. And I think a culture of yellow early, that shift, I think could be important because I think oftentimes people shift the status on a project too late. And oftentimes it can be much too late to sort of course correct at that point. And instead of looking at, reporting a problem on a project as a failure and, the risk around that, I would say, flipping to yellow early is a sign of professionalism within project delivery because it builds trust faster than anything else. If you're willing to admit, hey, there's a problem, I'm recognizing it and identifying it early so that we can course correct and make sure this doesn't become a major issue down the road. I think that's how organizations need to think about delivery. And I think the other reason this is important is because, delivery is sales now. If you screw up execution, you don't get the repeat business or the renewal or, whatever the case may be in the various industries that are served in the project-based world. Clients will tolerate ambiguity and strategies to a certain extent just because of the complexity around what these businesses are delivering, but they won't tolerate, in today's day and age at least, ambiguity around execution. So again, thinking of delivery in that way, I think is important. So the yellow early thing is what I'm focused on.
That makes sense. So when you put it all together, the complexity of the market, the data, the AI, new expectations, it really does start to clarify why some, firms may be pulling ahead of others. From what you're seeing so far this year, what separates those high performing firms, compared to the rest?
Yeah, I think I'd sort of just maybe double down on the whole delivery piece because delivery historically in a lot of project-based businesses was the product of really good project managers with tons of experience, tons of domain knowledge. And we're in a situation now, given where, the aging workforce, given where we are with the difficulty finding good talent and retaining good talent and all of those things. And I think as a result, organizations really should think about delivery in a maybe a little bit more deliberate way than they have in the past. Because I think it's a competitive advantage. Like I mentioned earlier, delivery is as much sales as anything else now. You prove that you can deliver on time every time. Boy, that's a great differentiator and sort of good brand for your business. So I think thinking of delivery as a product, if you will, standardized, repeatable, integrated systems in terms of how that delivery process is supported and executed. One version of the truth when it comes from sort of project to cash, if you will. I think all of those things are key. It's no longer the concept of relying on these heroes, these project managers that have so much experience and domain knowledge and whatnot, because, those heroes may not be around forever. And as a result, the system breaks. High performing firms, I think in this climate, in this world, build a machine that works regardless of individual talent. Delivery stops being a sort of back office function and really starts being a strategic asset. That's why I sort of say delivery as a product, if you will. I think that's a key thing for organizations to think about in this world because it can really become part of the organization's brand and a key differentiator.
Very insightful. Something that we haven't touched on as much. We've talked a lot about how, we're going into this year and what folks should be doing to set themselves up for success. But what do you see on the horizon in terms of like the future? The marketplace changed so much last year, for a variety of different reasons, whether it was economic, technology, innovation. What do you see on the horizon, in the year to come and beyond?
Yeah, I think, again, it's hard to sort of contemplate that question without thinking about AI and some of the technology shifts that we're going to see. Boy, I tell you what we've seen just within the past few months around AI, whether it be some of the new models that have come to life, whether it be something like Moltbot, if you're familiar with that, or Cloudbot or Moltbook, and the agency that we're starting to see sort of surface in AI. And the capabilities. Now, I'm not talking about Singularity or necessarily AGI, things like that, but the ability that's going to exist or is already starting to come to life when it comes to agents and digital workers and the AI around it is going to continue to have a significant impact. What does that mean for the future? What does that mean in terms of what organizations should be thinking out as they look at the horizon? I think data is going to be absolutely critical. And I don't I know I mentioned the sort of the data paradox earlier. I think sort of stopping the dashboard wars, if you will, and unifying your data. And the reason I think that's so important as you look out into the future is everything an organization does today in relation to their data is going to make them more capable in the future when it comes to AI. Because let's face it, nearly everything AI does today is deeply, deeply rooted in data. So having good data, having unified data, having good data discipline is going to enable businesses down the road. But I think, in addition to that, I talked about signals, I talked about decision philosophy or velocity here as well. As the AI gets even better, as the agency gets even broader and more powerful, I think standardization around how organizations look at signals to help with decision latency, think how organizations look at how they can use that AI capability to surface those signals to, again, course correct on problems before they become big problems. I think we're going to just see that capability, that concept get amplified significantly in the next 12 to 18 months. So if organizations are sort of positioning themselves well around these sort of key things to think about, key considerations, they're going to be in a much better position term.
Perfect. So then that brings us to our closing commentary here. You've given a lot of great insights, a lot of practical, um, things for leaders to do. If you could just leave them with one piece of advice, so that they could better position themselves for 2026, what would that be?
Just one, huh?
Or as many as you need, focusing on one.
So obviously, AI, we've woven that through here. So maybe that's a good one and probably very resonant for everyone. I talked about the efficiency trap around AI early, and I think that's something for people to think about. Don't get caught up in, what AI has been able to do over the past 2 years. But I think there's another piece there that's important, especially in the context of delivery, which we've talked about repeatedly today. People have to be careful thinking AI is going to fix bad delivery. AI is going to expose bad delivery. It's going to expose weak data. So if your data is messy, AI is going to hallucinate more and it's going to hallucinate faster. And if your processes are broken, if you don't have sort of good best practices and whatnot when it comes to the delivery in your business, AI is just going to automate the chaos. And I think it's really, really important to sort of understand to have your house in order before you start, plopping AI on top of it, because AI is just going to expose bad things. It's going to automate chaos. Like I said, you have to fix the foundation first, if you will. If your house is messy, turning on a brighter light just shows more of that mess and dirt, right? So again, it's getting your house in order before sort of applying AI to it. I think it's an important thing to think about. AI is not a magic wand. You got to fix and make sure you've got good disciplines and best practices in place. And then AI will be that sort of false multiplier that we talked about.
Awesome. Bret, thank you so much. This has been such an insightful conversation. It was wonderful to have you here. And hopefully for our listeners, they've gained some practical knowledge and things they can, use actionably, in the months ahead to position them for success. So hope to have you back sometime soon.
And Katja, I appreciate being here.
Take care. Have a good one.
Thanks, you as well.